Okay, so with Dune Part 2 being a film phenomenon, it's made a lot of people start to look at Star Wars differently. There's been lots of tweets talking about how George Lucas ripped Frank Herbert off, and I thought I'd dive into the story to talk about what happened. I know this is a topic that comes up every time something Dune releases, so I wanted to put together all the info that I could find. In this video, we're going to cover Frank Herbert's reaction and some of the issues that stemmed out from it. Obviously, I'd love to hear your thoughts too, and the side that you fall on after we go through the story. Personally though, I love both franchises and think that Star Wars has gone off and done its own thing. Still though, it's a conversation worth getting into, and firstly I want to talk about the main similarities. There's Arrakis and Tatooine, sandcrawlers, mention of spice, and the mysterious religious figures that control people with their voice. Moisture farmers pop up, emperors and empire soldiers, rebellions and a chosen one that's sort of like a messiah. These are some things that were noticed early on, with newspaper.com chronicling this article from Associated Press. This asked whether Dune was a Star Wars spin-off, and people quickly got in touch with Herbert. This included his son Brian, who told him the similarities were simply unbelievable. According to Polygon, Herbert was contacted by the Village Voice editor and asked flat out if he was going to sue. Herbert hadn't actually seen Star Wars at this point, but he told the press he'd try hard not to sue. Polygon also brought up his comments at the time, where he said the following: "I have no idea what book of mine it fits, but I suspect it may be Dune, since I had Princess Alia and the movie has Princess Leia. And I hear there's a sandworm carcass and hood dwellers in the desert, just like in Dune." Now, he and his son apparently identified 16 points from Dune, and there were several others who noted these similarities. Lucas was also upfront about most of his inspirations too, with him citing the work of Kurosawa as being a major influence. There was also the early Flash Gordon serials and Pulp Fiction 50 shows which Lucas said inspired him. He also brought up Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, which was more of a framework on how to build this story. However, he never actually acknowledged Herbert's work, and is yet to say whether he read the book. When pressed on it, he said the only similarities were that they both had deserts, but I think the language and names go far beyond that. If you look at Star Wars, the similarities are very clear, especially if you go into the early script drafts. One of them had spice as the MacGuffin instead of the Death Star plans, and spice has been something that showed up throughout several films. Also discovered that originally the Jedi were called Jedi Bendu, and there's Piranha Bendu, which comes from Dune, which the Bene Gesserit use, so bit suspicious that, George. However, Herbert never saw the success that Lucas did, and his original plans for a film never got off the ground. This all went down in 1973, with it being 4 years before the release of Star Wars. There's a great documentary about Jodorowsky's Dune, which goes into that 14-hour treatment. It was supposed to be big and bombastic, and if released first, it might have changed sci-fi. However, its massive budget meant it never got made, and then Lucas ended up creating Star Wars. That was of course a massive success, and it showed a space opera epic was possible on film. Now, this never sat right with Herbert, though he did downplay Lucas stealing his ideas. He said that the work probably shared a lot of similarities with Isaac Asimov, and also noticed that he wasn't suing either. It has to be said that Dune and Star Wars also pull from ancient myths, with the name Atreides being based on Atreus. This was a story from ancient Greece, and he noted that it might all be a coincidence. However, Herbert then finally saw the film and said that he was bored and that his wife fell asleep. Herbert was constantly dogged with questions on it though, which he said made him think about it even more than before. Eventually, he did state he believed he'd copied him, but he couldn't say whether or not it was actionable in court. At the time, Herbert was also in a lawsuit with David Matthews, not to be confused with the Dave Matthews Band. Now, he dedicated an entire album to Dune, which is a banger, though this still caused issues legally. According to Discogs, since CDI had not secured writer Frank Herbert's authorization to use his novel Dune as the thematic centerpiece for the album, Herbert filed a lawsuit against CTI and won. This forced the label to delete it from the catalog and meant that it couldn't then be sold. Still on YouTube though, shabow! Now, according to his son, Frank was livid and organized a group with other writers called We're Too Big to Sue George Lucas Society. According to History of Yesterday, Brian stated they'd use humor to mask the pain and even invited George to become an honorary member. This was under the stipulation that he had to buy them dinner, which is something that Brian joked his father never got. His film adaptation also eventually got off the ground, with David Lynch heading up the movie. The 3-hour treatment handed in by Frank Herbert eventually got cut down, with the film then getting panned. This all came in the wake of Return of the Jedi, which had completed Lucas's trilogy to great success. Dune now looked inferior to Star Wars, and many realized that what Lucas pulled off had been near impossible. Commenters stated that if even the author of Dune couldn't make it into a movie, then Lucas should be applauded for what he'd managed to pull off. Dune was meant to kickstart a trilogy, but in its failing it hurt both Herbert and Lynch. Herbert was working on a screenplay for the sequel, but due to it bombing, this was quickly scrapped. 1984 saw the release of Heretics of Dune, which seemed to have a little dig at Lucas. In one paragraph we get this, which I'll try not to butcher the names of, but here we go. In the time of the Old Empire, and even under the reign of Muad'Dib, the region around Gamu Keep had been a forest reserve, high ground rising well above the oily residue that tended to cover Harkonnen land. On this ground, the Harkonnens had grown some of the finest Pelingan tam, a wood-steady currency always valued by the supremely rich. From the most ancient times, the knowledgeable had preferred to surround themselves with fine woods, rather than with the mass-produced artificial materials known as polystyrene, polaz, and pormabat. As far back as the Old Empire, there had been a pejorative label for the small rich and family's miner, arising from the knowledge of the rare wood's value. He's a 3PO, they said, meaning that such a person surrounded himself with cheap copies made from declassed substances. He's a 3PO, obviously being a little jive to C-3PO, which is one of Lucas's creations. Herbert said to have made peace with Star Wars though, and continued the joke that he just wanted a dinner. Sadly though, he died 2 years later and wouldn't even get a McDonald's from George. Come on George, send him a Domino's. What the hell are you doing? Now in hindsight, we can look back and see what Star Wars grew into and chalk it up to being more than just taking things from Dune. There's of course Jar Jar Binks, but no, there's lots of unique things and ways that it grew. I think Dune's more of a comment on religion, and it's heavily steeped in politics and industry. Dune is more of a cautionary tale that shows how religion can manipulate people. Star Wars, on the other hand, is more sincere, with it kind of being a fantasy about wish fulfillment. If you looked into it close enough, I'm sure you could even say Harry Potter stole from Star Wars, as there's Dickensian motifs that it also shares with that. We've got an orphan who lives with his auntie and uncle that then discovers he's part of a powerful family of wizards. He gets an amazing weapon, i.e. a wand or a lightsaber, and then goes off to discover what the world's really like. Now, Charles Dickens didn't do that, mate, I know, but we had a kid who found out he was really rich, just like Harry Potter. Either way, I love both Star Wars and Dune, and think that though there's similarities, they have a lot of differences. To me, Lucas kind of stood on the shoulders of giants and then built his world based off things he was inspired by. I do wish though that he'd acknowledge Herbert's legacy, as I think without Dune that you don't get a franchise that brought happiness to millions. Dune is a cornerstone of sci-fi, and it's difficult to find anything that doesn't wear its mark. That's the same as something like Foundation, and I'd also say Star Wars has grown into that too. In before, people say it's a space opera, but come on guys, you know what I mean. I think Lucas took lots of elements from things like that, Flash Gordon, and crafted them together to create his own work. Now whether that bothers you or not, let me know below, as I do think it's something that will be talked about forever. Please drop a like on the video if you've enjoyed us going through it, and if you want to support the channel as a member of the Spoiler Society, then please click the join button. You'll get early access to videos every week, and it goes such a long way to helping us out. Now if you want to pick up some Heavy Spoilers merch, we've also got a t-shirt line located below the video that will let you pick up all kinds of tops like our Theory Time one, House of Dragons stuff, Marvel tees and more. We drop new designs on there all the time too, so definitely keep an eye out, and thanks for your support. Now, if you want something else to watch, we've got a Dune breakdown on screen right now going over lots of things that we pulled from the movie. Head over there right after this, and huge thank you for following us as we've talked about Dune. Really means a lot, you guys are loving the videos, and yeah, sorry for milking it so much, but I just enjoy the film so much. With that out of the way, thank you for also watching until the end. I've been your host Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.